Hello, I'm Clint Walker, and this is Real Estate Appraiser Secrets. And today we're going to talk about if the contract price falls within the appraiser's adjusted range of values, does that mean the house is going to appraise? So, first, if you don't know, how an appraisal report sort of wraps up right before the very last thing we do, which is to put a number on it. In most lending assignments, we're talking about, in the context of lending work, which is almost always what I'm talking about for you all. Once the appraiser's done pretty much everything and they've picked all their comps and adjusted their comps for the differences that they can support, we get a range of values. And depending on how much data we have and how homogeneous our sample of comparable sales are, we might have a very narrow range of value or tight range of values. I think that I've had them as narrow as like $5,000 from cell 1 to cell 7. And I've also had them as wide as hundreds of thousands of dollars when I'm appraising multi-million dollar properties or properties that are on acreage or have lots of moving parts. So the question is, if the contract price is within that range, will the house definitely appraise? I was asked this question just last week. I can tell you from my conversations online and in appraiser communities and talking to my peers that it seems like our industry is almost split on this question, maybe almost right down the middle. I see a lot of appraisers say that in fact, if that contract price is within their range, they feel like by the virtue of having adjusted their sales to be equivalent to the subject, if their final number is within that range, then the house does appraise and they're going to hit it. I personally don't feel any obligation to justify the contract price based on my range of sales, and that is because my range develops out of the necessity of bracketing the physical features of the property based on the lending standards or the ultimate investor standards they're going to sell these loans to. So they've got these requirements for us that require us to bracket the physical features. And bracketing is like good appraising technique anyway. But we've got to bracket, which is essentially for every physical feature, for every relevant physical feature of the property, we need to find a closed sale that also features that physical characteristic. And bracketing also is the technique of finding properties that have both superior characteristics and inferior characteristics, so that at the end of the report we have with almost 100-degree certainty at least set the outside parameters of what the price could be. So by virtue of having picked superior comps, we have demonstrated in the report that the value of this property cannot be higher than this, and by virtue of selecting inferior comps, we have set out with practical certainty that the final opinion or that the value of the subject cannot be lower than this. And then we use our adjustments that we derive from the market to try to narrow it further, and ultimately it comes down to our opinion of where the final value fits within that. So because of the way that we have to bracket these physical characteristics, the way that a property can easily get complex. These very tight windowed homogeneous properties do not come along very often. So just the general complexity of the property for me does not mean that my ultimate range of value definitely means the contract price is a thing that should happen. What I'm looking for is an actual similar property or multiple similar properties, and seeing what they sold for in order to inform my final opinion of value. Now again, the industry seems to be split on this issue. I don't think it's 50-50 split. I think that most appraisers, they are probably approaching it the same way that I do. There are just more factors than that range. And again, the bracketing thing really just sort of blows it up. To give you an example of how bracketing can affect that adjusted value range and make it so that it's less compelling than it might sound. Say that I'm doing a property with acreage or some unique feature like a shop, or maybe it's a log cabin or something like that. So let's take a log cabin, for example. You're almost always dealing with a very limited amount of data in this area with log cabins. They don't sell that often. So, say you've got a log cabin property like one I sold last year that was about 3,500 square feet, and it was on over 6 acres, and it had a basement, and it was a log cabin. And what else? Did it have anything else that would have to be bracketed? I think it had a creek in the front yard. So let's say it had some flood hazard area on the property. So everything I've just described to you is something that I need to bracket when I'm picking comps. I need to find one, at least with lender work, that has some flood hazard area on the site. I need to find one that is a little bit bigger than 6 acres and a little bit smaller than 6 acres. I need to find a comp that is a little bit bigger than 3,000 square feet and a little bit smaller than 3,000 square feet. I need to find a comp that has some basement, and I need to find a log cabin comp. So I've just listed off about a half dozen things that I need to find among closed sales and have them included in my report. Some of those things I might find more than one of those factors in one property, but I also need to find as many properties as I can that contain those factors. So that's a good example of a report where I might have to include upwards of 8 or 9 comps in the report to cover all of these features I need to bracket. And because of the way real estate works, the only log cabin comp that I can find in a comparable location, or maybe we'll just say the best log cabin I could find, is on 30 acres, right? So my subject, by virtue of being 3,000 square feet on 6 acres, might be $1 million. A log cabin that's even generally comparable on 30 acres might be 2 million, might be 2.5 million. So now my unadjusted range of value is already $1.5 million on to the high end, and who knows where the low end is. Might be another 500,000 on the low end. So my overall range before I've made any adjustments is like $2 million, and that's perfectly acceptable because bracketing is so important for us that it just has to be done. So my unadjusted range before I've made any adjustments is $2 million. I'm going to narrow that down a lot because that 30-acre log cabin sale, I'm going to find out what the value of that 30 acres is compared to my 6 acres, and I'm going to adjust for that difference. So that's going to narrow my range, might narrow it down $500,000. But you see, even there, I'm still at $1.5 million adjusted range now if I make no other adjustments to that comp. So it's not really realistic to say the value of my subject is plus or minus $1.5 million. I need to narrow it down even further at the end of that. And so that is kind of a good example off the top of my head of how, in my mind, the range of adjusted values just isn't that compelling. Now, if my comps are very homogeneous and there's these little $1,000 and $2,000 differences that I just can't figure out any reason for, but they're there, in that case, my range is more compelling because, buyers, buyers and sellers, they come up with these prices, and sometimes there's a rhyme and a reason to them, and sometimes there's not. So, and I understand that, and I think most appraisers understand that as well. So in that case, when we can't really sort out the differences here, then in that case the range is much more compelling to us. And if your contract price falls within that, I think you got a better chance of the appraiser just saying, yeah, it makes sense. It all makes sense. It's all reasonable. I've tested this every which way, and the contract price is fine. So I hope that's helpful. I don't think that as agents we deal with coming out in a range very often, but for those of you who are familiar with the appraisal process and maybe you've been to my class and understand that we do come out in a range, or maybe you're pulling your CMA and you're seeing that, well, this property, it does just sort of fit into this range of values, and you understand the appraiser is also going to see it that way. Try to go a step further and see if you can really hone in, or if you think the appraiser is really going to hone in. Like, you've got a range, but there's one comp that you just can't ignore because it's so good. That's a good indication that the appraiser might also come out with the same opinion at the end of their work. So I hope that helps. If I can ever be of service to you with a pre-listing appraisal because you are struggling with that range, or you do have a complex property, you can find me on appraiserpool.com. And I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much for watching as always.